So now perhaps Olena Dobrodnyak could come to give the final presentation of the morning. Hello, Olena. It's nice to meet you, and we look forward to what you have to say to us. And Olena is a systemic family psychotherapist, training therapist, and supervisor, and she's going to talk about the development of the processes providing psychological and psychotherapeutic assistance in Ukraine at the moment. Do you think, Olena, that you're able to give your presentation within half an hour? Is this okay?
I will try to do my best.
Thank you very much.
I will try to be very concentrated on that,
Okay.
and I will myself flick the slides, so maybe it will also make our work a little bit faster. So I also wanted to say once again, because we are going to rely more on my supervision work as a supervisor, so that's why just shortly about my identity of the supervisor, that I am a supervisor in system family psychotherapy, and I have been working like this since 1999. But apart from that, I also have another work. I am a supervisor based on the standard of ANSA from 2014, and at the beginning of the war in 2014, and then after the full-fledged war, I also conduct supervisions as a volunteer to those who are helping us. And just shortly, I would like to tell you, oh, just a second, I clicked somewhere wrong. I will try to do it again. So I would like to tell you shortly about this general view of how this supervision was conducted by me during the war. At the beginning of the full-fledged invasion in February 2022, almost all supervision projects, learning projects in the framework of Ukrainian Society of Psychotherapists came to halt, and we thought that it's for some not understandable term, but we knew that already in May. So during that time of stop, for members of my section that were engaged in this crisis work, despite the fact where they were at that moment, we conducted such volunteering support supervision. At that time, I also conducted supervision for one of the teams in mental health service, and this cooperation started from this organization in 2018, and it actually continued during all those years. Then later other teams joined us, and at some point I became supervisor in the fund Right for Protection. And the materials of all those supervision I would like to share. Based on that material, I would like to share my experience and my observations. So starting from February 2024 and up till now, I have conducted around 700 hours of supervisions, a big part of them in group format. And lion's share were crisis supervisions. Their amount is much higher now if to compare with just learning supervision, if to compare with the pre-invasion time. What are the changes in structure and functions of supervision that happened in the background of our military crisis? I would like to once again, the topics that I would like to tackle during my speech, that first of all, I would like to tell about changes of structures of the systems of support, including supervision. I wanted to tell about the possibilities of the supervision as instrument of reflections of macro-processes in the sphere of social psychological support. And I also wanted to talk about those organizational, structural, and meaning changes in the work of psychotherapists and psychologists that took place from the beginning of the full-fledged invasion, large-scale invasion. So these are the changes that took place in the supervision. Specifically, so what I can tell, that at the beginning, when working with the session, with the sections of family systematic work, lots of therapists at the beginning of the war, already my colleagues mentioned it earlier, changed their framework of work. They tried to adapt to this crisis situation. We all were in war at the beginning of the war. Our clients, us, and even those Ukrainian clients who already were abroad at that time. time. Lots of colleagues didn't manage to get themselves together, and their practice was stagnating for some period of time. Some of the colleagues need help as well. Lots of colleagues just postpone their practice for being volunteers or working in the social services. Those colleagues who were engaged in the first phase of the war, who were working from 2014, they fast oriented what to do, because they just didn't stop providing this crisis help during all this time, because geographically they were at the east of Ukraine. Some of the colleagues started practice just during the war. It is interesting phenomenon that some people and some students, some of the students were not were afraid to start their practice, and they started this practice during the war. So learning supervision stopped, as I have mentioned, and when they started once again, then I would like to say that they significantly changed the topic. They also had they mentioned crisis support there as well. So if to look at it in general, then such private practice really decreased, and lots of my colleagues from systematic section and not only went either to work in volunteering, or they were working in psychological services. So I would like to say that this crisis supervision is different from the supervision that is just calm learning help. And here we have different demands, different functions, support and helping in preventing burnout and avoiding secondary traumatization, the formation of optimal support for during the crisis, and in other formats needed in the organization. From sometimes they very rarely they were able to provide more meetings, and for that they had to reformat their work. That's what we were taught, and we were trying to have this before. We had this long diagnostic period, but here we had to move really fast. We also had to support strong sides of specialists while realizing their strong sides, because every specialist who came to this crisis service, they had to rely on what they knew the best, and they had to try to learn what they lacked. Usually such supervisions are shorter if to talk about form and time. Supervisor does not only rely on this traditional frameworks of 1.5 hours for one person, but structures the processes, and sometimes during the first period, a very short period of time, we managed to conduct several supervisions and to give impetus to those colleagues who needed it. I would like to share one of my metaphors that came to my mind during this work, that activity of this crisis psychologist is some kind of wave breaker for clients. All that activity, all that traumas, all that pain, they kind of go to this crisis psychologist. So this wave of experience breaks of their container. So then the activity of the supervisor is also the wave breaker for crisis psychologists. So it's like the second wave. The reflections of tendencies, this is the separate opportunity for supervision. This is the second function I would like to mention, because after the first phase of the full-fledged invasion, when we all were in tense situation, in the first place we had these questions of self-support and supporting each other, and it was conducted through support groups and supervisions, where we often shared not cases but our own experiences. But after that, for some period of time, we had another task to understand general social and psychological processes, understanding that experience that we were going through. The reflection of the processes of our activity is actually one of the main supervision processes. But with the help of supervision, we can reflect more global common processes, not on the level of individual dynamics, but on the level of understanding what's going on with the whole society of psychologists, what is going on with the social psychological help in our whole country. For that, apart from working on certain cases, and both supervision and the group tries to understand certain tendencies with different aspects. For example, how the categories of beneficiaries change, how their the requests change, what challenges can be expected, what competences does it require from us as specialists. It mentioned that if sometimes supervisor just asks to look at it from top to bottom, and that's sometimes becomes as our own personal experience, because sometimes members of the group, they come and they say that I have such a wish that I want for all of us to have a look at what's going on with all of us in our service and our society. And it is my second metaphor. The first one is about the wave breaker, as I have mentioned, and the second was about the raider. That supervisor, the supervision, apart from just well-known functions of learning and forming identity and supporting and preventing burning out, it can also work as the raider, because this raider catches tendencies of our tumultuous times, and it helps us to verbalize, and that's how we are more ready to our future challenges at our work. So if we talk about changes in supervision, then it is a change from learning to crisis one, and these functions as wave breaker, accepting that these emotions and that pain, for them not to break out and get rid of the secondary trauma. And the second thing is this radar, this opportunity to look at it from the top. So what topics did we manage to catch with that radar and to observe? So I would like to mention them here. The first one is the self-awareness of your self-understanding of your place and functions in fight and living the crisis. The second is the stages of forming social psychological support in Ukraine. The third is structure of social psychological services. The fourth, tendencies of changes in the structure. And the fifth, new challenges. I will tell a little bit about every point, and I will try to prove why it was important to choose those topics for our members of supervision. First of all, it's the understanding of your plans and functions. Psychologists and psychotherapists became important part of the fight of Ukraine for their victory. And for this, we need awareness, what is expected from us, what we can do, what we cannot do, our limitations and our capabilities, what do we need to form and what do we need to learn in new conditions, where are we in the system of support, who are we connected with, how we can care about ourselves so we can conduct all these functions, perform all these functions. So all those questions help us not only do our work, but also realize where we are, where I am, as this whole network of support, of help, and what kind of part am I in this fighting for freedom. And this self-awareness, self-understanding is actually strengthens and also helps to prevent to prevent burning out. It was also very important to understand this the short history that already took place. For Ukrainians, the war didn't start in 2022. In 2022, it was the large-scale invasion. For us, all the events started in 2014, when after the Maidan, at first we had annexation of Crimea, and then provoked by Russia military aggression in Luhansk and Donetsk. And Volodya has already mentioned, he really was one of the leaders of that movement, of creating volunteer movement and then creation of spontaneous self-organizations. That's how we held those NGOs, crisis services that appeared. And in this or that way, they were developing up till the full-fledged, the large-scale invasion. At first, it was volunteer movement. Then on this wave, NGOs appeared, and they were not only during the Maidan and at the beginning. They kind of accumulated their strength, their power. They were learning their participants. That's why in 2022, we already created a network of, already a whole network of organization was created, and our colleagues respond almost immediately. In the first hours of the full-fledged invasion, there was already this offer from crisis services to provide crisis services in different cities of Ukraine where those services were created. But the request was the much bigger than we had organizations at that time. That's why in the future new organizations were formed, or some departments of social psychological support in the framework of humanitarian organizations that before did not provide such help. For example, in the Fund of Right for Protection, where I'm working right now. I would like to tell you one of the stories in one supervision group, and it is this illustration of those challenges that Ukrainian specialists in the sphere of mental health had to go through at the beginning of the large-scale invasion. It was that group that I have been cooperating with before the large-scale invasion, and at certain point this story is very close to me, and I lived it through, and there's also some kind of illustration. So this story dated back to 2018. It was the workshop conducted in the framework of organization mental health service in Mariupol, and it is my personal pictures from my own archive. A part of these participants became later members of the supervision group. It was conducted for mobile brigades that were going to gray zones. Gray zones, these are those zones which did not belong to at that time. There was no Ukrainian control over them, and there was no DNP, LNP control over them, and people at those zones, they also needed support. So this is also the work that entailed some risks for life. All of those participants lived in cities of Donetsk, Luhansk, Mariupol, Volnovakha, Kramatorsk, Severodonetsk, Shastia. I know that maybe those names do not really tell a lot to our European colleagues, but they really tell a lot to our Ukrainian colleagues, because these are those titles that made our hearts beat faster. And majority of my colleagues from those cities in the first day of full-fledged invasion of Russia to Ukraine already were under the occupation. Some members managed to leave the place, someone had to stay in the occupation, and we had long days of worrying about their fates and lives. Majority of them, thank God, are already in more safe places of Ukraine. Some of them are abroad. Some of them had to stay in the occupation, and they're still there, unfortunately. Already in March 2022, the group renewed its work, and the first issues were reorganization of the group, because the group it got smaller, and we were worried whether we would be able to preserve the safe, whether we had this financing from financial donors, because donors had some doubt that therapists who were internally displaced and potentially traumatized can be effective. So yes, they asked such questions, and they were ready to stop this project, but only we could provide such help at that time, and we managed to do this. As of now, the supervision group has also colleagues from Dnipro, Chernihiv, Sumy, Kyiv, and they provide support in those regions, various help. As you can see on the pictures, they work with elderly people, they work with children, they work with families of fallen soldiers, and they hadn't stopped their work despite their own personal, very difficult circumstances. As I have already mentioned, many of them had to be relocated for two times already. So as of now, on the territory of Ukraine, we have network of support to all those who suffered from war. It's a state services and volunteer movement, work of social psychological services in the framework of Ukrainian NGOs and funds, where we create working places for psychologists, psychotherapists, social workers, and others. The integration is taking place between organizations, and they coordinate their actions. This network is very important answer to what is going on right now, and it is our hope in a way. I'm not going to stop here. I just want to say that for members of our groups, it was very important to understand the whole structure of work in those organizations, because when you understand where you are in that system and what expectations are to you from different parts of this organization, for example, crisis psychologists, from beneficiaries, heads, foreign donors. So this also helps you to prevent burnout, because you understand pretty well what do people expect from you and how you can respond. And part of these organizations are also supervisors. They are either internal employees, or they are outsourced people, so they from time to time monitor this process. I would like to say shortly about those tendencies, those trends that we can observe while working in those organizations. First and foremost, this is about so-called dynamics that took place in our before in front of our eyes, yes, beneficiaries and clients. In During the first days of the full-fledged invasion, the categories of society started asking for help, which those categories were not. We were not working with them as psychologists because special services were working with them before, but it is also some kind of enlightenment function. We do not have stigmas. People stop being afraid of specialists. We try to find, silver lining in every cloud. We try to change our form of work. Now, do not clients look for specialists, but specialists find those who need such help, and our specialists go to those places where IDPs are living, and they kind of offer their services. Also, different topics, they change all the time, and we can see how topics change. Later, I will mention which topic are the most up-to-date for now. Change of working with the same organization, their structurization, a little bit of bureaucratization, but we all can also observe that. Trends in the change of professional positions, self-treatment, and also expectations and demands of the work of the very specialists, and that's how we understand that our profession is very valuable. We can also say that psychologists in those organizations, on the one hand, it is very difficult work, and as I have already mentioned, the specialists see lots of biases here, lots of sufferings, and sometimes you have to go beyond your office. Sometimes you have to change those long-lasted traditions that you were taught for many, many years, and those specialists who were taught in Ukrainian Psychotherapeutic Society and in other organizations, sometimes they have to work in a more focused way, use a little bit different positions, to have a very rigid framework. They have to understand what's going on even more. They have to understand about everything about the setting. They have to focus their work on such special certain tasks and to cooperate with other colleagues, with social workers and other people. But there are also positive aspects to that. It's first of all massive experience, very fast learning of our specialists. We broaden our horizons of our skills, we get new information, and we feel that we are needed, that we are important, that our profession is valuable. And it is about this other side of the war, about this traumatic growth, about those colleagues who I have been working with in supervision groups. Then obviously we can observe this. Tendencies to prospects. So these are those topics that we hear more often than in the latest times. This is integration of separated families. Kira has mentioned that. It is a topic of working with militaries and families of militaries. These are those topics that most often our crisis psychologists face with right now, and they bring that to supervision. Integration of separated families, topic of the working with militaries and with their families. And here our colleagues face the fact that those who do not have basic knowledge in trauma therapy, they try to learn additionally right now in that sphere. There is a huge demand on that right now in Ukraine, but supply is also pretty huge. Working with teenagers, they're afraid to get this lost generation. Working with the topic of splitting in society. At the beginning, we did not have those topics. We were all very much united. We all were gathered. But now we have lots of topics, this comparison. Somebody left Ukraine, somebody stayed in Ukraine, somebody was in the occupation, somebody wasn't in occupation, some of us lost close ones, somebody did not lose anybody. So but we still need to be united, and how to get that and how to overcome those topics, it is important thing that we need to think about. We think a lot about future, whether we'll be able to process at least part of this traumatic experience, or whether we will be that generation that we will pass it over to next generation. What exactly are we going to pass over to the next generation? Here I would like to provide an example from one of the last groups, when there was an example about the grandmother who always bought 2 loaves of bread instead of 1, and she always answered "let it be." And the story about the cell phone in one, about actual landline phone in one family. Father of the family told, no, 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 do not get rid of this landline phone, you might need it. And the story of that phone is very interesting, because after the large-scale invasion, relatives that were in very difficult condition managed to use the landline phone and tell that they are alive, because there was no other connection. They couldn't use their cell phones. And what are these stories about? This is about the story from the past. You have to be ready to your next adversaries. So adversities. Sometimes you think that whether we'll be able to forget all of this, but there is a question: do we need to forget all of that, or maybe something that trauma teaches us? We need to be ready for that. Whether we will be able to return our peaceful image of the world, or we will still be thinking in this military landscape. Whether the story of forced migration of million Ukrainians become only the story of the traumas and losses. This is a metaphor of uprooted tree, and this, or maybe lots of Ukrainians will come back now while knowing foreign languages and rules of life in the EU. Maybe it will help us to make microcultures in Ukraine a little bit closer, because at the beginning sometimes we did not have Western Ukraine and Eastern Ukraine. There were just all the Ukrainians that needed support. These are the topics that I very often voiced at the supervision groups. And conclusions, very, very fast. The system of psychotherapeutic and social psychological help in Ukraine suffered huge reorganization, but at the time of full-fledged invasion, we already have had structures of support provided, and we managed to respond very fast. So previous events did not only transfer this experience of trauma, but also experience of coping. Supervision support as part of the system of help also had reorganization and changes. Supervision during crises can help a certain range of functions: support, prevention from burnout and secondary trauma, but also can be the tool of understanding microprocesses and self-understanding of specialists in these processes. The first one, Ukrainian specialists do not only respond to challenges of time, but they also try to respond to all current difficulties and challenges, and then find ways to minimize those trauma impacts. Work of Ukrainian specialists is an example of traumatic growth. And the last one, gathering, creation of national network of support and help. It is implementation of experience of gathering as the best tool of resisting aggression and trauma. The last, I leave it as an open rhetoric question. So whether is it only trauma, but also traumatic growth? And here we have 2 pictures. The one was very popular at the beginning of the war. You see here the man with little girl. There is this uprooted tree, or actually uprooted house as an uprooted tree. And in one of the groups, there was different metaphors that maybe this relocation, it is about going back, because birds, they also leave their countries in the autumn, but they always get back for nesting for their own countries. Storks in March always get back to Ukraine. So thank you for attention. Glory to Ukraine. And I am extremely grateful to my colleagues and foreign colleagues, because it seems to me that our topics overlapped a little bit. They reflected each other. So thanks a lot to the organizers, to the working group. Thank you for this invitation. Thank you for letting me share my experience with you today. It seems to me that I managed to do everything on time.
You did indeed, Olena. Thank you so much for your excellent and very insightful presentation, which gave us so many insights into the way in which supervision is underpinning the work that's going on. And I was so impressed to hear you say that really the structure and the support from supervision has been there from the start of the full-scale invasion, which is extraordinary. I also really liked your metaphors. I thought that the breakwater is such a powerful metaphor for the role of supervision, and also radar, that you are picking up and absorbing and understanding and making sense in your role as supervisor, especially in these days. So thank you. And indeed, your presentation complemented the other two exceptionally well, and we look forward to having the chance to ask questions in the round table. And I hope you'll see that in the chat there are quite a number of messages of thanks that have come to you. Now we've come to the end of a rich and wonderful morning, though it's not morning anymore within Europe, so it's time to take a break. And I hope that you will have a chance to, as Emmy said, pay attention now to your own personal welfare and needs. And as you eat food, it's a nice phrase, eat slowly and savor the food. So really taste it. Allow yourself to feel the nourishment of the food, as indeed today we are feeling the nourishment of the presentations given to us. Please come back at 2:20, 2:20 Central European time, and then we'll have the important dialogue in our small groups. So 2:20, please come back for that time. I'll see you later. Thank you. Thank you very much again, Olena, Vladimir, and Kira. Thank you.